because I have the proof that you're lying. You want to see a picture?
At exactly 7:41 p.m. on a night when the ocean was supposedly roaring with a violent, life-ending fury, a single camera lens captured a chilling reality that completely obliterates the foundational defense of Brian Hooker. For weeks, the public has been forced to process a harrowing narrative delivered by the former Marine, a story of a sudden monstrous wave that tore his wife, Lynette Hooker, from their dinghy and swallowed her into the pitch-black waters of the Bahamas. He described a chaotic maritime nightmare, 2 to 4 foot waves crashing relentlessly, a howling wind that drowned out her screams, and a desperate, agonizing struggle where he was left with only a single oar, completely powerless against the elements as he watched his wife's head disappear between the dark swells. It was a tragic, near-faultless sequence of events if you chose to believe it, painting a picture of an unpredictable accident that no man, not even a trained military veteran, could have prevented. But a newly surfaced photograph, time-stamped to the exact minute of this alleged catastrophe, has struck this investigation like a physical blow. The image does not show a raging ocean or white-capped waves threatening to capsize a vessel. Instead, it reveals Ant Pat's Bay wrapped in a deep, glassy stillness. The water is perfectly flat, the sky carries the residual glow of dusk, and the entire scene looks less like a nautical crisis and more like a mirror. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why that detail matters so deeply to the federal investigators who are now quietly closing the net. This single undeniable snapshot of reality does not just contradict a statement. It completely vaporizes the physics of the husband's story, forcing us to look at the night of April 4th through a far more sinister lens. This is where things get serious, because when a timeline is built on a falsehood, every subsequent action taken by those involved must be re-examined from the ground up.
And you got 3 different versions of where she was swimming. And not one of them.
Brian Hooker told search and rescue teams, local authorities, and devastated family members that the conditions were so severe he was instantly separated from Lynette after she bounced off the back of the small craft. Yet, the photographic evidence places their vessel, the 46-foot sloop named Soulmate, in a calm, shallow anchorage where the water is famously transparent. If the water was flat, if the wind was negligible, and if the sea was entirely at rest at 7:41 p.m., then the narrative of an uncontrollable, wave-driven separation becomes a mathematical and physical impossibility. A strong, capable former Marine would not be rendered helpless by a glassy sea, nor would a husband lose sight of his wife within seconds in a localized, shallow bay where an adult could potentially stand up or easily swim to safety. This glaring discrepancy is the catalyst for a massive shift in the investigation, transforming a tragic missing person case into a high-stakes federal criminal inquiry. As the public tries to reconcile the horrific mental image of Lynette drifting away in a storm with the serene reality captured on film, the pressure on Brian Hooker has reached an absolute boiling point. His stories are no longer just collapsing under the weight of suspicion. They are being actively dismantled by the very environment he claimed was his enemy. Stay with me because this is where it gets complicated, and where the timeline begins to fracture into irreconcilable pieces. To truly understand the gravity of this photographic breakthrough, we have to look at the immediate aftermath of that quiet evening in Ant Pat's Bay and trace how the official story began to morph depending on who was listening. When a person vanishes at sea, the first few hours are critical, demanding absolute clarity, immediate reporting, and a laser-like focus on the last known coordinates. Instead, what investigators discovered was a disturbing pattern of delays and shifting testimonies that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. Brian did not immediately trigger an emergency broadcast. He did not alert nearby vessels in the anchorage who could have dropped searchlights into the water within minutes. Instead, hours passed in total silence while Lynette was allegedly adrift in the dark. When he finally did speak to authorities and family members, the details of where Lynette was supposedly swimming did not just blur, they completely contradicted one another. In true crime investigations, behavior in the immediate wake of a tragedy is often more telling than physical evidence, and in this case, the verbal map provided by the only witness changed directions like a weather vane. Let us dissect the 3 entirely different versions of Lynette's final moments that Brian distributed to 3 separate entities, a narrative unraveling that no jury is likely to view as a simple mistake caused by trauma. In his initial recorded conversations with search and rescue personnel and their close friend, Blaine Stevenson, Brian stated that after Lynette fell off the back of the dinghy, he threw out a flotation device and watched her actively swim toward their anchored sailboat, Soulmate, which he claimed was roughly 1,000 yards away to the south. This version paints a logical, albeit tragic, attempt by a victim to reach the safety of her primary vessel. However, when Brian washed ashore in Marsh Harbor and encountered a local boatyard security guard, his story underwent a massive geographic shift. He told the security agent that his wife had gone into the water, but this time, he claimed the last he saw of her, she was swimming vigorously toward Hope Town. To anyone familiar with the geography of the Abaco Islands, this change is not a minor slip of the tongue. Hope Town lies directly to the north, while Soulmate was anchored to the south. How does a witness confuse two diametrically opposed cardinal directions when describing the final, desperate actions of his drowning wife? The contradiction grows even more baffling when we introduce the third version of the story, one that introduces an entirely new destination and an entirely new timeline. This version was delivered directly to Kathy Shepard, Lynette's stepmother, during an agonizing phone call on Easter Sunday around 6 p.m., nearly 24 hours after the incident actually occurred. Brian told Kathy that after Lynette fell into the water, they were separated almost immediately in the darkness. He claimed he threw a seat cushion toward her but couldn't. Completely independent of the northbound route to Hope Town or the southbound route to the sailboat. Within a matter of days, the story had expanded to encompass 3 different fates in 3 different directions. South to the boat, north to the town, and west to the beach. Not a single one of these 3 versions is close to the other, creating a chaotic triangle of misinformation that leaves investigators asking one fundamental question. What is the real story that these 3 narratives are trying to hide? Take a moment to step back and look at the physical environment where this third version supposedly played out, because the geography itself acts as a silent witness against Brian's claims. He stated to Lynette's stepmother that it was getting dark, implying that visibility was heavily compromised when he lost sight of her. But the time-stamped photo at 7:41 p.m. shows that the region was still illuminated by the twilight of dusk, where the white hull of a boat or the silhouette of a swimming human would be starkly visible against flat, glassy water. It takes only about 10 minutes to traverse the distance from the Abaco Inn, which they had just left at 7:30 p.m., to the area where she supposedly went overboard. This means the incident occurred exactly during that window of high visibility, completely undermining the claim that the darkness swallowed her up instantly. Furthermore, the northern end of Lubber's quarters, the very area Brian claimed he was forced to drop anchor and fire off distress flares because he couldn't make it to land with one oar, is actually a notoriously shallow shelf. The water there is often only a few feet deep, a sandy flats environment where a grown man could simply step out of a dinghy and pull it ashore. The imagery captured by local search volunteers shows crystal clear, knee-deep waters extending far out from the coastline, making the image of a helpless marine trapped by raging depths entirely absurd. I want to pause here and ask you, the viewer, to look at these facts objectively. When you see a timeline where the weather reports, the photographic evidence, and the physical depth of the water all stand in direct opposition to a husband's frantic narrative, what conclusion does your intuition point toward? Do you believe it is possible for extreme panic to cause a person to misremember the direction of wind, the height of waves, and even the direction their spouse was swimming, or do these shifting stories feel like a calculated attempt to cover a completely different set of events? This case is moving incredibly fast, and your insights and theories down in the comments section help keep this investigation in the spotlight where it belongs. Drop your thoughts below because the collective eyes of the true crime community are often what prevent these cases from fading into cold case files. This changes everything we thought we knew, and as we prepare to transition into the technical, forensic, and digital layers of this investigation in the next segment, the true scope of what the federal authorities are uncovering will shock you. Stay tuned, because this is only the first part of a deeply unfolding mystery, and the mechanical truth waiting on deck is about to alter this entire investigation. As we transition from the physical geography of Aunt Pat's Bay into the technical and forensic layers of this mystery, the investigation shifts away from conflicting human memory and directly into the unyielding realm of digital tracking and marine telemetry. While the Royal Bahamian Police Force retained custody of the physical dinghy tender, American federal investigators from the Coast Guard Investigative Service, widely known as KAIS, managed to secure the primary vessel, the 46-foot sloop named Soulmate. For weeks, the public watched as specialized federal agents walked on and off that boat in Marsh Harbor, carrying heavy evidence bags and sealing the hull in yellow crime scene tape. Now, highly placed inside sources have confirmed that the heavy-lifting forensic processing of Soulmate is officially complete. Because saltwater is notoriously corrosive to latent evidence, fingerprints, and DNA transfers, authorities are preparing to haul the massive vessel entirely out of the ocean and place it into a secure dry dock facility. But it is the technology attached to that boat and its small tender that has investigators completely obsessed, because in the modern era, a marine vessel leaves behind a digital footprint that is nearly impossible to fully erase, no matter how much a person knows about electronics. This brings us directly to the baffling mystery of the electric engines, a technological puzzle that might hold the ultimate proof of what transpired after the twilight hours of April 4th. A few years prior to her disappearance, Lynette had texted her close friends, Blaine and Marn Stevenson, expressing immense excitement about a brand new mechanical upgrade they were installing on their dinghy following a catastrophic lightning strike that had fried the boat's baseline electronics. She explicitly noted in her message that they were purchasing an NT300 electric outboard motor, a cutting-edge marine engine equipped with integrated Bluetooth capabilities. For liveaboard cruisers who spend years navigating isolated international waters, a Bluetooth-enabled engine is a massive luxury because it transmits real-time telemetry data directly to a smartphone app, allowing the operator to monitor battery life, power usage, RPM metrics, and historical distance logs. To a federal investigative team, that telemetry data represents the absolute holy grail of evidence. It can map the exact speed, throttle position, and duration of a vessel's journey, providing an unalterable digital timeline of exactly where that dinghy traveled on the night Lynette vanished. But when Bahamian sources finally inspected the dinghy currently sitting in local police custody, they discovered a mechanical variation that threw everyone back on their heels. The engine mounted on the back of the tender was not the advanced NT300. It was an older Torpedo model. This sudden, unexplained variation in the physical evidence introduces a terrifying new theory into the investigation, one that points toward intentional obstruction. Did a mechanical swap take place in the dead of night while Soulmate sat anchored and unmanned in the weeks following the disappearance? Cruisers who live on their boats for years, as the hookers did, frequently keep spare gear, older machinery, and backup components stored below deck as a vital safety lifeline. If Brian returned to the primary vessel alone after something terrible happened in the bay, he would have been acutely aware that the NT300 engine carried a detailed digital record of his movements. A tech-savvy operator could theoretically swap the engines, leaving an older, non-functioning, or unlinked motor on the tender to mislead local authorities while hiding the data-heavy engine deep within the bowels of the primary ship. But the manufacturer of these high-end marine propulsion systems provides a frustrating twist for anyone attempting to manipulate the data trail. The telemetric records are not actually stored inside the plastic housing of the engine itself. The digital memory, the usage logs, and the power fluctuations are entirely retained within the smart batteries that power the units. Think about the profound implications of that engineering detail for a moment. An operator could spend hours swapping the heavy outboard engines entirely, believing they had wiped the digital trail clean, while completely ignoring the fact that the plastic battery casing sitting right beside them held the absolute, unalterable truth of the voyage. However, because the Bahamian authorities failed to immediately secure Soulmate and seal it as an active federal crime scene, the boat sat entirely vulnerable in Marsh Harbor for weeks before American agents intervened. Anyone could have boarded that vessel in the dark of night, and critical evidence, including those heavy, easily disposable smart batteries, could have been tossed into a deep trench in the sand or vanished into the local black market. If Brian Hooker understood how these battery systems worked, he possessed a window of several days before he was briefly detained and released, a window where he remained on the vessel completely unsupervised. Authorities are now faced with the monumental task of tracking down those specific batteries, demanding that Brian account for the exact location of the power sources used on the night of April 4th. If those batteries are missing, his defense will likely claim they were stolen by local harbor scavengers. If they are found, they will either validate his story of a prolonged struggle against the waves or expose a calculated low-speed voyage that completely betrays his timeline. This case serves as a stark, heart-wrenching reminder of how fragile the pursuit of justice can be when multiple international jurisdictions are involved and when time is allowed to erode a crime scene. If you believe that Lynette's story deserves relentless national attention and that the technical contradictions in this investigation must be exposed to a wider audience, please take a brief second to share this video and subscribe to the channel. By hitting that subscription button, you help ensure that we can continue to dedicate the massive resources required to track down sources, analyze transcripts, and bring you the unvarnished truth of these complex cases. We are committed to following this investigation wherever it leads, and your continued support is what keeps this platform entirely independent and focused on real accountability for victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Now, let us turn our attention to another piece of latent technology that could completely bypass the missing batteries and provide a direct, unalterable visual record of the anchorage: the mast-mounted FLIR camera. Investigators processing the exterior rigging of Soulmate noted a high-end thermal imaging camera securely attached to the upper mast. For liveaboard sailors, a FLIR system is an essential security tool, allowing them to monitor the surrounding waters in total darkness and stream live video feeds directly to their smartphones while they are ashore dining or exploring. If that thermal camera was active on the night of April 4th, it would have possessed a bird's-eye view of Aunt Pat's Bay, completely immune to the falling darkness. It would have recorded the exact time the dinghy departed for the Abaco Inn, and more importantly, the exact time it returned. If the camera data reveals the dinghy sliding back alongside Soulmate with two distinct silhouettes on board at 7:41 p.m., Brian's entire story of an open-water disappearance collapses instantly. It would prove that Lynette made it back to the primary vessel alive, shifting the timeline of her death away from a maritime accident in the bay and squarely onto the deck of the sailboat itself. Even if the defense claims that the camera was turned off or that the cloud storage subscription had lapsed, federal cyberforensics teams are deploying advanced data recovery techniques that have cracked open major high-profile cases in the past. Take the famous Nancy Guthrie investigation, where a standard doorbell camera had no active recording subscription, yet federal tech specialists were able to scrub the hardware and extract cached, time-stamped images that ultimately secured a conviction. The Coast Guard Investigative Service is uniquely equipped for this exact type of maritime digital archaeology, and their agents are currently working directly with technology manufacturers to pull any residual data from Soulmate's internal servers. Brian Hooker, who was previously terminated from a position at AT&T for allegedly manipulating the GPS tracking units on his commercial work van, clearly possesses an advanced understanding of how to mask his digital presence. He knew how to obscure a location on land, but masking an array of interconnected marine electronics, thermal cameras, and smart battery logs under the intense scrutiny of a federal investigation is a different matter entirely. I want to pause here and ask you, the viewer, to weigh in on this technological stalemate. When you look at a case where the physical evidence may have been compromised by jurisdictional delays, do you believe that digital forensics and data scrubbing will be enough to bring the truth to light? Do you think the missing NT300 batteries were genuinely stolen by random harbor thieves, or does their absence feel like a deliberate attempt to keep a dark secret buried forever? Your insights and theories down in the comments section are incredibly valuable, and they keep the digital momentum of this case moving forward. Drop your thoughts below, because as we prepare to transition into part 3, where we will track Brian's bizarre cross-country flight and his sudden acquisition of a high-powered defense attorney, the legal warfare behind this mystery is about to intensify. Stay with me, because the net is tightening, and the answers are closer than they seem. As the digital and forensic dragnet begins to tighten around the calm waters of the Bahamas, theater of this investigation undergoes a massive geographic and legal shift, moving away from the isolated shores of the Abaco Islands and slamming directly into the federal courts of the United States. Following his brief detention and subsequent release by the Royal Bahamian Police Force, a delay that deeply frustrated Lynette's family, Brian Hooker did not linger in Marsh Harbor to assist local dive teams or wait for volunteers to comb the coastline for his missing wife. Instead, within 48 hours of being allowed to leave the local precinct, Brian boarded a commercial flight and vanished from the island, surfacing days later thousands of miles away in a quiet residential pocket of Washington state. To the public and to Lynette's devastated mother, this sudden cross-country flight felt like an act of absolute abandonment, a calculated retreat to a safe harbor while a massive search operation was still actively pulling debris from the ocean. But it was his immediate actions upon landing on American soil that signaled to federal prosecutors that Brian was no longer treating the situation as a tragic, heartbreaking accident. He was preparing for a war. The moment Brian touched down in Washington, he did not reach out to family support networks or check into a medical facility for the psychological trauma one would expect after watching their spouse drown. Instead, he immediately retained the services of one of the most elite, high-powered criminal defense attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. This is where things get serious, because the legal infrastructure Brian has constructed around himself tells a story entirely independent of his verbal statements. His lead counsel is an attorney notoriously famous for handling high-profile, high-stakes federal cases involving complex jurisdictional boundaries, international waters, and advanced forensic evidence. Within hours of taking the case, Brian's legal team issued a sweeping, absolute non-cooperation directive to all law enforcement agencies, effectively shutting down any further direct communication between the former Marine and the investigators trying to find his wife. They established a rigid, impenetrable wall, declaring that Brian had already given his official account to the Bahamian authorities, that he was deeply traumatized by the loss of Lynette, and that he would offer no further statements, interviews, or clarifications to the Coast Guard Investigative Service or the FBI. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why that detail matters so profoundly to the optics of this case. While a citizen has an absolute, constitutional right to legal counsel and protection against self-incrimination, the abrupt transition from a grieving, desperate husband assisting a rescue mission to a completely silent, heavily defended subject of interest creates a chilling narrative contrast. This total communication blackout extended far beyond law enforcement. Lynette's family found themselves completely severed from the one person who possessed first-hand knowledge of her final moments. When Lynette's mother attempted to call Brian to ask for specific details about what clothes Lynette was wearing or where exactly the dinghy had flipped, her calls were blocked, and she was informed by an administrative assistant that all future inquiries would need to be routed through a corporate law office in downtown Seattle. For a family living in a state of perpetual, agonizing limbo, this legal stonewalling was an emotionally devastating blow that transformed their profound grief into a burning, relentless demand for justice. But while Brian's defense team was busy building a legal fortress on the West Coast, the federal government was quietly orchestrating a massive counteroffensive behind closed doors. Because the incident involved American citizens aboard an American-registered vessel in international contiguous zones, the United States Department of Justice possessed the legal authority to impanel a federal grand jury. For weeks, a hidden, highly confidential legal process has been unfolding, with prosecutors subpoenaing financial records, phone logs, and personal correspondence belonging to both Brian and Lynette. Now, inside sources have confirmed a massive breakthrough. The grand jury has officially issued a series of high-level federal search warrants targeting not just Brian's temporary residence in Washington, but his digital cloud accounts, backup servers, and personal communication devices. This means the communication blackout Brian attempted to enforce through his legal team has been completely bypassed by a federal judge's signature. Stay with me because this is where it gets complicated, and where the secret life of Brian Hooker begins to bleed into the public record. When federal agents executed these digital search warrants on Brian's historical phone records, they didn't just find standard text messages. They uncovered a meticulously archived trail of communication that completely shatters the illusion of a perfect, idyllic live-aboard marriage. For over a year leading up to her disappearance, Lynette had been documenting a severe, escalating pattern of controlling behavior, financial isolation, and intense marital strife. In a series of deeply private, encrypted messages sent to her sister, Lynette revealed that Brian had systematically stripped her of access to their joint navigation business accounts, leaving her entirely dependent on him for basic survival funds while they were isolated at sea. She described the 46-foot sloop, Soulmate, not as a dream retirement vessel, but as a floating prison where every movement, every phone call, and every digital interaction was closely monitored by a husband who was becoming increasingly volatile. The financial data recovered by federal analysts introduced an even darker motive into the investigation, one that points directly toward a cold, premeditated calculation. Just 3 months before they departed for the Bahamas, a massive, highly unusual changes of beneficiary form was filed regarding Lynette's substantial corporate life insurance policy, a policy valued at over $1 million. The documentation, which is now a central exhibit in the grand jury file, shows that the secondary beneficiaries, who were originally Lynette's children from a previous relationship, were completely removed from the policy. Brian Hooker was designated as the sole, primary beneficiary of the entire sum, meaning that in the event of her accidental death or disappearance at sea, he stood to inherit a life-changing fortune completely free of estate taxes. When investigators cross-referenced the digital timestamp of that insurance modification, they discovered it was executed from a laptop utilizing an IP address registered to a hotel room Brian had occupied alone during a solo business trip, raising the terrifying possibility that Lynette may not have even been aware the change was being made. I want to pause here and invite you, the viewer, to share your perspectives on these escalating legal and financial revelations. When you look at a timeline where a husband flees an active search zone, hides behind an elite criminal defense team, blocks his missing wife's family, and stands to inherit a $1 million insurance policy that was modified in secret, how does that alter your view of the haunting photo showing a completely calm, glassy ocean? Do you believe these financial anomalies are merely a series of unfortunate coincidences, or do they represent the classic, undeniable warning signs of a premeditated plot? Drop your theories and thoughts in the comments section below, because your engagement keeps the national spotlight firmly fixed on this courtroom battle. This changes everything we thought we knew, and as we prepare to transition into the fourth and final segment of this documentary update, the ultimate explosive piece of physical evidence recovered from the hull of Soulmate is about to be revealed, bringing this entire mystery to its definitive, heart-stopping climax. Stay tuned, because the final piece of the puzzle is about to fall into place. The legal warfare playing out across American courtrooms has finally collided with the raw, physical reality of forensic science, leading to an explosive discovery deep within the structural anatomy of the sailboat Soulmate. As the grand jury intensified its review of the financial records and the suspicious insurance modifications, federal forensic teams working inside the secure drydock facility in Marsh Harbor turned their attention away from the digital systems and focused entirely on the physical hull of the primary vessel. When a large boat sits in tropical waters for extended periods, it requires a highly specialized bilge pump system to manage the natural accumulation of moisture, saltwater, and engine condensation. This system, which sits at the absolute lowest point of the interior cabin beneath the floorboards, acts as a drainage trap for anything that falls, spills, or is washed down from the living quarters above. Investigators knew that while a person can spend days scrubbing countertops with bleach and wiping down wood surfaces to eliminate biological traces, the dark, inaccessible chambers of a marine bilge pump are nearly impossible to clean without completely dismantling the structural integrity of the ship. This is where things get serious, because what the forensic analysts discovered when they pulled apart the primary bilge filtration unit has completely rewritten the final hours of Lynette Hooker. Using advanced, high-intensity ultraviolet light arrays and specialized chemical reagents that detect blood hemoglobin even after prolonged submersion in brackish water, scientists identified a massive, localized concentration of biological material trapped deep inside the secondary intake valve. The DNA profiling, rushed through an expedited federal lab analysis, came back as an absolute, undeniable match for Lynette. This biological evidence was not a minor trace that could be explained away by a simple kitchen accident or a minor cut sustained while cooking at sea. The sheer volume and velocity of the blood splatter patterns discovered beneath the floorboards indicated a severe, catastrophic trauma that occurred inside the cabin of Soulmate. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why that detail matters so profoundly when juxtaposed against Brian Hooker's original defense. It proves, with absolute scientific certainty, that Lynette was bleeding heavily inside the primary vessel long before she was ever placed into the small rubber dinghy tender. Stay with me because this is where the entire narrative of a sudden freak wave in Aunt Pat's Bay completely disintegrates into a horrific scenario of premeditation and staging. When federal prosecutors paired this devastating forensic discovery with the time-stamped photograph showing the completely flat, glassy water at 7:41 p.m., the true, sinister nature of Brian's timeline became clear. The evidence suggests that the maritime accident was a completely manufactured fiction, an elaborate theatrical production designed to explain away the disappearance of a woman who had already been fatally incapacitated within the walls of her own floating home. The defense's claim that Lynette bounced out of a speeding tender during a localized nautical crisis is no longer just implausible. It is completely contradicted by the physical blood evidence left behind in the bilge of the boat. Investigators now believe that the dinghy was utilized not as a vehicle of survival, but as a mechanism for body disposal, allowing a calculated operator to transport an unresponsive victim out into the deep, transparent trenches of the Bahamian Shelf under the cover of falling darkness. The weight of this final discovery has completely broken the public stalemate, triggering an immediate, high-level escalation from the United States Department of Justice. Armed with the forensic match from the bilge pump, the digital tracking logs, and the secret financial modifications uncovered by the grand jury, federal judges have officially issued an unsealed, top-tier arrest warrant for Brian Hooker, charging him with first-degree murder within the special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the United States. As this breaking news ripples across the true crime community, the focus shifts entirely to the impending legal reckoning that awaits the former Marine in a federal courtroom. This case is no longer an agonizing missing person mystery wrapped in international red tape. It is an active, fast-moving homicide prosecution that promises to expose every single dark secret hidden beneath the hull of Soulmate. This entire investigation has been a heart-wrenching journey for everyone who has followed Lynette's story, serving as a stark reminder of how thin the line can be between an idyllic dream life and a calculated nightmare. If you believe that Lynette Hooker deserves absolute justice, and that independent investigative journalism is vital to preventing these tragic cases from being buried in silence, please take a final, sincere moment to share this video across your social platforms, leave your perspective in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel to follow every single development as this historic trial begins. Your voice, your engagement, and your continued support are the absolute lifeblood of this platform, ensuring that we can continue to stand up for victims and demand unyielding accountability from those who believe they can escape the reach of the truth. As we close this final chapter of our investigative update, the true weight of what occurred in Aunt Pat's Bay remains an unresolved, lingering shadow over the family Lynette left behind. Brian Hooker sits in a federal holding facility, his elite legal team preparing a fierce defense to challenge the validity of the bilge pump forensics and the digital metadata, proving that the courtroom battle ahead will be as complex as it is devastating. The physical search for Lynette's remains continues in the deep waters of the Abaco Shelf, a silent, relentless effort by volunteer divers who refuse to let her be forgotten by history. The case is far from over, the final verdict has not yet been written, and critical answers still lie waiting in the dark depths of the ocean. Thank you for watching, stay vigilant, and keep demanding the truth, because this story is just beginning to unfold.